Gentle with your forward force. Any forward force will try and make as so hard to tell. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey guys playing Smash Brothers, your round is over.
No, which one I just wondered is slingshot or spear? Shield. Slingshot. Okay, it's better slingshot.
Man, those guys really gotta stop putting paper in their coffee. It's chronic, man. Take the lid off. Alright, everybody get the Bible. You want the Bible, get one.
I forgot mine.
And put your phone in the bucket if it's not already in the bucket. Lucky butt.
Unless you're in a dreaming competition. Unless you're in
When I was in next.
Kate, are you chairless? Are you just looking at stuff?
What?
Are you chairless or are you looking at stuff?
Looking at stuff and chairless.
Is a chairless stuff looker? It sounds like an old West, like, super bad insult. You chairless stuff looker.
Hey, why did you install that when you have a white chair? A white.
Did you not notice what's back there?
Look, well, there's
Well,
stuff.
get up, go look.
I know, I see stuff.
Well, the stuff is tall enough to get in my screen.
The computers.
See? There's like even stuff on the walls now. Even on the walls. It would be annoying to see like the image projected over three-dimensional objects. It'd be hard to read things. Parts of sentences would disappear. It'd be terrible. Yeah, if you guys aren't in the loop, maybe you haven't been here in a while, or maybe you just never got the full scoop. We have a grade school starting in this room on Tuesday. And so we are now going to be sharing the room back and forth, back and forth. It'll be school room on the weekdays, during normal school times, and then it will be the junior high room during, junior high normal services, special events, all that stuff. So we have a lot of stuff that's new. We have a lot of stuff that's missing. We have some new stuff still on the way that we haven't finished yet. So yeah, lots of little big changes all over the place. There's going to be more TVs, there's going to be more better places to stick all the video games when you're done playing. It wasn't more better, it was more and better. Which is still proper, just sounds wrong. And there'll be like a Lego table there instead of those bookcases.
Legos?
Yeah, Legos. So lots of fun stuff, but just haven't finished yet. Hopefully we'll get to do a lot more of it tomorrow. Andrew said he might be able to get me some help, so that's good. Anyways, so yeah, lots of changes. If you have questions about those changes, please feel free to ask. You do not have to complain quietly. If there's something that bugs you about the changes in the room, we would like to hear about it. That doesn't mean we're going to fix it in 5 seconds, but we at least want to know if something is not as good for you guys as it used to be. Turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now, we just finished going through the book of Daniel on Sundays. And some of you guys have been here for those studies, some of you guys have not. And so you may not remember everything from the book of Daniel. Book of Daniel is in the future from where we are now. We've jumped even further into the past today as we get into 1 Samuel. And so we actually mentioned during the study in Daniel why the country of Israel, why the nation had been shipped off, carted off, and stuck in Babylon. Does anyone remember the why of that? Why did they get trapped in Babylon? For 70 years, no less.
Because they did something really bad.
Yeah, but do you remember what it was? Yes.
I think it was pretty much they disobeyed God,
Mm-hmm.
and
Generally speaking, that is not incorrect.
Oh.
But does anyone remember what they disobeyed God
They
about?
didn't take a vacation.
They didn't take a vacation. What were you gonna say?
Yeah.
You can add more, or you can just say yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They were sacrificing idols.
Variously at various times. Yes, they were. Yeah.
Yay.
So what happens is in Daniel's time, and his is in the 500s BC. He was a part of those first few people that were kidnapped and taken off to Babylon as punishment for hundreds of years of disobedience. What we're doing now, as we go all the way back to 1 Samuel, is we're going back to the beginning of those hundreds of years. This is right after they've got the country. We're skipping one small part. So they've had the country for a little bit. They have the country during the book of Judges. Does anyone know the book of Judges? Anyone? No? Anyone know the book before that, Joshua?
I shall
He's
search.
a dude.
Okay, guys, think about the beginning of your Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers,
Judges.
Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. So Joshua comes first. That's the getting of the land. That's the conquering, the going in and taking over. Judges is that first season after they have the land. And Judges is probably the most horrendous, horrific book in the entire Bible. What happens in those first few years is a horrible pattern. Following God, doing what he says. We all have kids, we all have families, and then we get old and we die. Those kids and those families say, well, life is good, we don't really need God, whatever. Do whatever we want. Suddenly life starts getting bad, everyone starts hurting each other, everything's terrible. God punishes them, they don't like being punished, they cry out to God, they say, God, what do we do to fix this? And he's like, well, actually a lot, so let me send you a messenger. He sends them someone called the judge says, here's what we do to fix this. They all turn back to God. One more generation, they follow God, judge dies, next generation starts the whole cycle over again.
Yay.
Totally thought you were going to ditch him. Hilarious. Sits down, nope.
You should have.
Not happening. Oh, Bibles. Quick, grab them over there.
I have one behind my back.
Lies, can you grab Kate one?
Lies.
Lies. Lies.
What did that do?
Nice.
Alright, so we're going after Judges because Judges is all true. And that makes it terrible. That's something you'll notice about the Bible. Everything in it is completely true. Everything in it is a perfect representation of how it actually happened. And that means it's got the good and the bad. And it perfectly represents how people are. Humans are stupid.
Yes.
And when they do stupid stuff, the Bible shows us what they did. It's like, yeah, they did this. And then we read it and we go, what? No. They
Jimmy
couldn't
have
have.
done
The
that.
Bible's like, yeah, they totally did. So I'm just skipping Judges for now. Do you guys ever want to go through it with your parents? Go for it. Do not read it alone. It's got some of the most gruesome stuff there is. And that's saying something. Because later on in 2 Samuel, we're actually going to see instances like two messengers come to the king and give the king bad news. And the king's like, you guys know what I did to the last guy who gave me bad news, right? I killed him. And the messengers are like, please don't kill him. And the king says, okay, guards, take their hands and feet off and go hang them from trees.
Aren't they technically already dead?
Somehow no. And that's the worst part.
Yes.
So like that's the kind of stuff that actually is coming up in 2 Samuel after we get done with this one. It's bad. But yeah, just throwing it out there, Judges is worse. If you can imagine that, Judges is worse. So we're skipping Judges. So where we're at right now is at a turning point. They had different kinds of rulers up till now. First there was that guy Moses. He was his own special breed. No one else was like Moses. Moses was king, he was leader, he was prophet, he was judge, he was everything. It was all packed into one dude. The only thing he wasn't was a priest. That was his brother. So it was, it was all in the family. Then you get past Aaron and Moses and you get into a new structure, the judges. Each one of them is sent to fix a problem. Hey judge, there's your country. Go turn it around. And they do it. Okay, so one leader, one job. Job's over. Leader stops being a leader. They're done. They get to retire. Now we're getting into this transition period. Samuel is going to be the first and last, both at the same time. He's going to be the last judge, and he's going to be the first prophet. He's going to be both. When he starts out the job, there is no king, and so he's like a judge. He leads, he fixes. Later, the country gets a king, and he becomes the first of the prophets. And there will be a lot of prophets as you go through the Old Testament. A lot. But he's the first one. And the job of a prophet is slightly different than a judge, because the king's supposed to lead the country. He's supposed to militarily lead and, write laws and do all that jazz. What the prophet's job is to come in when the king messes up and tell the king, hey, you messed up. Here's what you did wrong. This is what God says you should do instead. But until he messes up big time, the king just kind of does what he does. And then the prophet comes in to fix things. Likewise, the prophet can also go speak to the people. The people make some huge blunder. The prophet will go to the people and say, hey, you guys messed up. This is what God wants you to do about it. So Samuel's going to start as a judge, he'll end up as a prophet, and then the prophets just keep coming. After him, I think, is Nathaniel, and then you get to Elisha and Elijah. I always hate those two because they have the same name practically. It's terrible. And they're friends too. So there's stories with both of them, the same story. Just, yeah. Just change your name, why don't you? Yes.
I'm starting to notice a pattern.
Yes.
Whoever is a king or has power over other people seems to be bad.
No. They're just stupid. Some of them are bad. All of them are stupid. This is the pattern.
That makes sense.
Some of them are stupid and bad.
Try to find one non-stupid person. It's pretty much impossible.
Funny story, okay? Solomon, right? Wisest man who ever lived. Anyone know how he got to be so wise?
He asked for wiseness.
See, that's the funny thing. Sometimes when you ask God for something, he doesn't wave his little magic God wand and say, ba-ding, now you are, or now it has happened. Sometimes he just sets up your life so that the thing you asked for will happen. And you won't even realize it's a miracle. He's changing everything from the background. He's pulling the strings. So you ask for wisdom, he's going to give you wisdom. That doesn't mean he's going to suddenly make you magically wise. He might, but he might also make your life teach you things. If you guys have lived at all, you know that learning things usually means learning them the hard way. Solomon, for instance, learned that marriage should not be your source of happiness. That you should be content in the Lord, and that will actually make your marriage happy. But if you try and get happiness out of your marriage, you will usually find discontentedness. You'll find all the problems with your spouse. You know how he figured that one out? He married one wife and realized he wasn't happy. So then he tried marrying 999 more, and he still wasn't happy. So he realized marriage doesn't bring you happiness.
He married 1,000 people.
Yes.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Boo! Yeah, basically, boo. But yeah, right? It's this is the year of weddings, and wait, we're still not done. One more year of weddings!
Get off the stage!
It's pretty terrible. But yeah, he basically figured out marriage wasn't going to make him happy, and he figured out the hard
Remember
way.
all their names. So he
I don't know if he did. He actually built other palaces in other cities to stick the wives in.
He's 1,000 wives. And
We're going to look at some of that today. Anyways, in 1 Samuel, check it out with me, chapter 1, verses... Oh, wait, no, I had to start first. The Bible! Yeah, okay, let's look at that for a second. These are all the books in the Bible. Does anyone know how many there are? Who said 65? Who said 67? Okay, what's the average?
66.
Yeah, there's 66 books in the Bible. Good job. So we have the Old Testament, that is the half before Jesus. And then we have the New Testament, that's the half from Jesus and beyond. In the Old Testament, you have 39 books. In the New Testament, you have 27 books. So what we have in the first 5 is the stuff that Moses wrote. Then you've got Joshua, where they take the land. Judges and Ruth. Ruth is during the same time period as Judges. That's where they're living under the judges. They're going away from God, towards God, away from God, towards God. This happens 12 times in the book of Judges alone. It's ridiculous. So that's 12 generations of people. Then you get into 1 Samuel. Now, it's written around 930 BC, but that's the end of Samuel's life when he sits down and writes both these books. Both books are actually the same book. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, same book. They're written on 2 separate scrolls because that's how long a scroll could be back then. They couldn't manufacture a longer scroll. So they split the book in half. It's like part 1 and part 2. So yeah, he writes 1 and 2 Samuel towards the end of his life. The actual events of the book take place before this. 1 Samuel entirely before he writes it. 2 Samuel, some of which he writes as it's happening towards the end. Yeah?
how long a scroll could be, why was Psalms 140 chapters or so?
Oh, all in one?
Yeah.
Yes, they weren't. They were in 5. Psalms is in 5
Why
scrolls.
didn't these do
If you
Psalms
flip through your
once,
Bible,
or
I
Psalms
kid you
and
not,
Psalms
in the book of Psalms, in most translations, it'll actually say at the breakpoints, book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4. Yeah, there. First page of Psalms says, book 1, Psalms 1 through 41. So you are, good catch. Yeah, Psalms is way too long for one scroll, or 2, or 3, or 4. It takes 5 scrolls. So, yeah. Plus, the Psalms are written all throughout time. They're all over the place. Anyways, okay, so what we're actually looking at today is 1 Samuel. It is not happening in 930 BC. It's actually going to start much before that. It's going to start in 1090 BC. So here's our handy-dandy timeline of all the books. Do note that the books of the Bible are not in the Bible in order. They're in the Bible thematically grouped. And so when you look at them, they are not in the order they occur. The first few are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all the way up to 2 Kings. They're in order. Once you get past that, it's not, because you got stuff like 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles that are happening at the same time as 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. And you've got all the prophets that are happening at the same time as those books. And you've got stuff that Solomon wrote that's all happening while Solomon was alive, and these books tell the story of Solomon's life, and this is stuff that he wrote himself. So I mean, there's just all this overlap, all this crazy amounts of crossover. But the first few are in order, and so 1 Samuel starts right here and covers most of the thousands BC. Goes from 90 to 10 in the thousands BC. That's where chapter 1 starts. So let's go ahead and read chapter 1, the first 3 verses, 1, 2, and 3. There was a man named Elkanah who lived in Ramah in the region of Zoph, in the hill country of Ephraim. He was the son of Jeroam, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zoph of Ephraim. Elkanah had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of Heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priests of lost my place. The priests of the Lord at that time were the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. I'll come back into the story later. Yes, question.
Me?
Yes.
Did they ever make a version of the Bible in order?
Yeah, chronological Bibles exist. You can pick one up if you want. It's just really hard to find verses when you're like thinking of a verse and want to go look it up, because like it could be on any page in any part of the book. But what I do find is easier is you can go print out a list and just fold it in half and stick it in your Bible, and it is the whole Bible in chronological order. And then if you want to read it in that order, you just look at your list. When you're done with a section, you go back to the list and see which section comes next. It's kind of cool. One of the fun things is, since the Psalms were written over the course of about 1,000 years, it's like seriously long time, they're written by people who are in the Bible at various times in their lives. So if you're reading chronologically, you'll be reading. Oh yeah, go read that one psalm. Come back. Reading. Oh yeah, go read that one psalm. Come back. And so like the Psalms are actually peppered, if you go chronologically, throughout the Old Testament. Kind of cool, because the Psalms are written by all different people throughout the whole length of the Old Testament. It's pretty sweet. Yes. Anyways, so in those first 3 verses, I have a few things you guys might care about. Zuph is not the way a Russian dog barks. It is actually a place. This is us. This is our church building. This is not current. We have solar panels now. Yeah. Covering most roofs.
It's American.
How
How do you make the screen move like that? Is it voice activated or do you have it on a time limit?
I have a clicker.
Oh.
It's a video. The video is just literally
Not
sitting
robot
still for
clicker.
the first few seconds. It plays instantly, but there's no motion in the first like 4 seconds of the video. Does that make sense? So it looks like it just sits there and then moves eventually, because that's what the video is of. Alright, so they live here in Ramah, and the tabernacle was up in Shiloh. Now the tabernacle, if you're not familiar, is this crazy complex tent structure that God told them how to build. And it was built all the way back with Moses. And that's hundreds of years before where we're at in this chapter of 1 Samuel. So this tent has been around for hundreds of years. That's pretty crazy in and of itself. Not to mention the fact that people travel here 3 times a year. It was mandatory for every single man, and yes, there was an age limit where suddenly the boys became men and they had to as well, all go to the tabernacle 3 times a year. Now the women were invited, but they didn't have to go. Purely optional. You could just decide to stay home if you felt like it. It's up to you. But, I mean, think about this. It's kind of cool. It is a country-sized feast all happening in this one city.
The feast?
Yeah, it's a feast. This is how it works. You go, you bring a sacrifice to the Lord. The sacrifice inevitably is like an animal or some grain or some wine or all three or whatever. And you give it to the priest, and the priests say, okay, we're going to give God this part. Then you burn it till it's gone. You just light it on fire and burn that meat until it is dust. And the rest of the animal, you cook it and you eat it. And the entire country brought an animal.
That's all.
Every family.
What about every member in?
Yeah! So, like, that's a barbecue and a half right there. Can you imagine the smell as you're coming into town? You're like, you know, a few hours late and everyone already got started.
You'd
Just
be able to smell it even if you were.
probably at home in Rama. You'd see all the barbecue smoke going up. You know what I mean? Charcoal prices would just be through the roof. So yeah, they had a heck of a cookout, and this was 3 times a year. That's one way to keep a country tight knit. Everybody gets together 3 times a year. Now eventually that gets moved down to Jerusalem. That's down south down here. But for now, tabernacle in Shiloh. There is no seat of government really. There is no capital city. There's no king. This is all pre-king, pre-capital, pre-Jerusalem being a big deal. That all comes down the road from here. David helps to set some of that stuff up. But he is not around yet. So, this family goes up there 3 times a year. That's kind of where we're at. Oh, and they've got 2 women and 1 dude in the same marriage. So that's notable. 2 wives, 1 husband, not God's plan at all. But not uncommon at this point in history. There's going to be a lot of stuff we'll see today that is cultural and part of their period of history, and that doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good, doesn't make it okay, doesn't make it acceptable even. It's just true. This is actually what happened. This is actually the way that it was. That doesn't make it good, though. As we see in this story, it's actually a big part of why this woman is depressed, is the fact that she has someone to be compared to. Does anyone here have a sibling they get compared to?
Nope.
Okay. Imagine that kind of stress of, am I good enough? Or are they good enough? That poison in your head of, yeah, I am better than them. Or that poison in your head of, man, I'll never be as good as them.
It depends.
Imagine that, but instead of you and your sibling, who are different ages, who, you know, both have the same parents, who love you both, in reality, rather than that, it's actually like 2 women trying to compete for the affection of 1 man. If you guys have ever seen that take place at your school, and it's like 2 girls trying to get to be dating the 1 guy, or 2 guys trying to be dating the 1 girl, or whatever.
What?
Imagine if it was an ongoing relationship, and you're fighting like that for the attention of them every day.
I go to Christian school.
That doesn't mean people don't date.
That doesn't happen.
Really? No
I
one
do
dates
homeschooling.
at all?
No one did.
How small is your
I go to
school?
our school, so
That's really,
I used to see that a lot of
like,
times.
probably about.
Oh, I meant number of kids, but yeah, that matters too.
Like maybe
No.
50 for all of the.
And no one dates in that 50 kid school. I'm not saying they should. I don't think junior high dating makes any sense at all. But I'm just surprised. Most junior high schools have dating couples.
They
They just
have
do.
they do. I think
Great, they are.
I'm tired. I think they do.
Go smell the high school room. Seriously. Just walk in, be disgusted, and then leave. Junior high boys smell good by comparison. To the high school boys? Oh my gosh.
Definitely.
It's not even, well, the sad thing is all you boys in here, it's just, give it a few years, you'll start smelling too. But anyways, we're getting off track. Where were we? Oh yeah, marriage. So we're actually going to be talking about marriage on Wednesday this week. If you guys want to hear about God's plan for marriage, come back on Wednesday. He has a lot to say about marriage. But people don't always listen. Here's the cultural side of this. This is why most guys had more than 1 wife in this period of history. Hey, John. You can totally raise your hand and add stuff to the conversation, but having a separate conversation while we're having a conversation, don't do that. Same goes for Wyatt. So back then, if you wanted to stay alive, you had to make something from the land. There wasn't a supermarket. Frequently, when you lived in a town, it was like you and 2 or 3 other families. That was the town. So when you lived somewhere, you had to make something from the land, or you would just die. That's just flat out, you're dead. You don't make food, you starve. You don't find a way to dig a well, you die of thirst or dehydration or whatever.
Cannibalism.
That doesn't last forever.
You run out of people soon.
You do run out of people eventually.
There's only 2 or 3.
You run out.
So really, this is kind of how it works. A few people have a hard time in this climate, more deserty environment, than a lot of people. Oddly, if you have more people, you can work more efficiently, and you can make more from the land, enough that you have enough to get by, and then you have a little extra. If you have less people, you work less efficiently, and you will barely make enough to stay alive. So the conflict here is, do I have a ton of kids who will then work with us, and I don't have to pay them wages, they just get food, they get a place to live, they stay in the family, or do I go get slaves?
Slaves.
These are kind of the two choices. If I don't do one of these things, I have to go find a bigger group of people and work for them. That's kind of it. I either have slaves or I have a bunch of kids, or I have to go like be an employee, which back then was called being a slave. Employees weren't really like a thing. There was no law that protected the employee. It was like you either gave yourself to someone and they took care of you, or you worked for yourself. These are your 2 options. So, very different culture from ours. But because of this, if a guy marries a gal and it turns out she can't have kids, he usually got married again. And that didn't mean he divorced her. It didn't mean he got rid of her. He was still going to take care of her, love her till the day one of them died. But he needed kids.
So you got kids.
This was a part of their culture. So he'd just keep marrying until he found one that could actually have a bunch of kids. And usually it didn't take more than the second wife. I mean, not that many women are barren. Not that many women can't have kids. It's not that common. But if the first wife you married can't have kids, yeah, a lot of guys back then got married again. Now, am I saying that makes it okay? No,
Yes.
I'm not. Am I saying it makes it right? It makes it acceptable? It makes it, a good idea? No, I'm not. I'm not. Because honestly, finding another way to stay alive is easier than keeping a 3-person marriage happy. That's just true. Finding another way to stay alive isn't sin. Having a marriage that doesn't follow God's plan is a sin. So, yeah, if you have to decide between finding another way to stay alive and marrying 2 women, or marrying 2 men, or having 3 people or more married, it's just, you find another way to stay alive. You just do. That's what you do. You do the right thing, not the easy thing. And marrying 2 women so that you can actually have a bunch of kids that can help you work the farm, that's the easy thing. That's not the right thing.
That's what
So Elkanah did the easy thing. He married another woman. Now, I don't know that that's his motivation, but because we know his first wife is barren, I'm going to go ahead and say that's probably the most likely reason he married 2 women. Yeah.
It's so easy to live right now that you'll probably do that. Like in science, there's this thing on where in 1800 there was about 945 million people in the world at that time.
Still a
But-
very small number compared to
Yeah.
now.
But in 2000 it got all the way to 5,463,000. Well, it was 5 million.
That's a very specific number.
It was over 5 billion by 2000.
Well, we need to ask Siri
Yeah,
that.
oh yeah, 5 million.
It's
5
over
billion.
7
Yeah, okay, there we go. Because that'd actually be a smaller number.
945 million. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, I gotcha.
5 billion.
It's
Yeah.
over 7
I got
So, I mean, it multiplied by over 5 times in a few hundred years. And now we're over 7 billion.
Yeah.
Since 2000 till now, we're over 7 billion. So that's 1.5 to 2 billion extra people
Yeah.
in just the 17 years. That's a crazy explosion of population.
Then we're gonna have people
A
like
lot of
floating
people.
in the middle.
No, it's funny you should say that, because still to this day, if you took every single human and gave them a tiny apartment-sized cube, and that's all they could live in, they couldn't get outside their cube, you could fit everyone into like the state of New York.
What?
The whole planet's worth of people could all fit there. The fact is there's a lot of space between us. That's just the way it is. Even though we have these cities where everyone's clumped up, you know, you go out on the highway, you have to drive for like 30, 40 minutes in a car traveling 70 miles an hour to find another city.
Wait, what?
All that space, there's no humans. Or maybe there's like a farm where there's, 100 acres and 5 people.
There's
So I mean, like, honestly, we're not gonna run out of space anytime soon. We're gonna run out of resources.
Yeah.
Most
Not
likely
space,
oil.
resources.
We're gonna die.
So, anyways. No, truth be told, if we get better at managing our
And then that's
crop
when we
land,
start
we won't run out of
initiating
resources.
thinning.
Right now, we shouldn't even have global hunger. We have so much farmland on this planet, but we also have so much food that just rots and goes bad before anyone eats it. That's why people are starving, because we can't move the food fast enough.
Why do you waste the food?
That's like I
Transportation costs money, and
Why
so
you
if people
kill
aren't willing to
food?
pay you a lot when it gets there,
Then
you
why
won't
don't they
send it
make
there.
their own food?
Oh,
So not everywhere on the planet is good for making large quantities of food.
They need to learn how to
Jungle?
teleport
It's
food.
not great until you cut all the jungle down, and that destroys the entire ecosystem of the planet.
And
So
then
there's a
we
lot
all
of
die
hurdles to
and
get
all
over.
They need to teleport.
You just need to move people to where the food is easy to grow. People don't like to
If
move
we
them.
cut down the rain.
Anyways, we're totally off topic, so we're getting back on topic now. Read with me. Verses 4 through 8.
We die either way.
Less social studies, more Bible. Come on back. Verses 4 through 8. Check this out, guys. It's not good. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion. Now, I have to stop you with that asterisk, because that translation is optional. The Hebrew is not 100% clear here, and as we translate it to English, you can go two ways. Either the phrase it says is true, and though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion. Or it actually might need to be translated, and because he loved Hannah, he would give her the choice portion. Those are very different sentences. Does that make sense? And though he loved her, he'd only give her one. And because he loved her, he would give her the. Do you guys catch the difference there? He's either a jerk or he's really nice. And it goes both ways in the Hebrew. And the reason is because the word for though, the word for because is the same word. The word for one, the word for the is the same word. And so you end up being able to flip that sentence. And later he's going to say something to her. And if he's a jerk, you just read it with a little bit of sarcasm that makes perfect sense. And if he's really nice, and you read it with a little bit of sincerity, and it makes perfect sense. And so we don't really know how nice or how evil of a husband this guy is. We don't really know. We have to guess, basically. Yeah. Yeah, oh, you don't have to raise your hand. Just go to the bathroom. Dude, sometimes I don't call in a hand for 10 minutes. You might die in your seat from bladder
I've
explosion.
had that happen so many
Yeah.
times. I just
It's kind of about how
Imagine
people are dying of starvation.
Wait, no social studies. Back to Bible. Bible.
It's about like you can't just have one.
No!
one
I said
thing.
less social studies.
One more thing.
Less social studies.
Yes.
Alright, so just keep that in mind that he might be nice, he might be evil. We don't really know. The translation goes both ways. Finish out verse 5 with me. Because the Lord had given her no children. Verse 6. This is where it gets really sour, guys. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. Why are you crying, Hannah? Elkanah would ask. Elkanah is the husband, if you've forgotten.
Oh, okay.
Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons? So again, if what he said before was, he loves her and so he gives her the choice cut of meat, and he's really a nice guy, then you could read this ending as, we have each other. Isn't that good? Isn't that enough? Be content. We have a happiness between us. Or if you read the first part as like he's totally a jerk and he's like, here, you can have this piece. Then that last part kind of sounds like, aren't I good enough for you? And he's all haughty and prideful and kind of being sarcastic. Like, you don't really need kids. He's like brushing off her concerns, her sorrows, as if they're not that bad, not that big. So really, I don't know about this guy. He could be great, he could be terrible. It's really hard to say.
I prefer happy ending.
You like the happy one? Okay, we'll just pretend from now on he's really the nice guy. There's no openings for him to be mean. He's absolutely nice.
Yes.
Okay, we'll go with that ending.
Now, so that means he's gonna do that.
Say it again?
You said for now, so that means that you know that he's gonna
Oh no, I just meant from now on. I didn't mean literally for now, but yeah, you could go that way, I guess. Alright guys. Yeah, so we have this issue here, and it's like I said before, totally born true. The the wife who has kids is making fun of the wife who doesn't have kids. And this is exactly what we shouldn't be seeing. We should not be seeing a comparison between family members. I don't know if your parents do this or you do it yourself, but when you compare yourself to your sibling, or they compare you to your sibling, that is not healthy for you. It is good to have goals. It is good to try and, be better than you are and aim high and shoot for something that's above where you're at right now. It is not healthy to look at another person who has other kinds of strengths, other kinds of talents, other kinds of, setup in their life, and for you to say, I need to be like that. That's not fair to you. It's just not. They're different than you are. You should not aim to be them. You should aim to be the way God made you. Likewise, if there was only one wife in this marriage and one husband in this marriage, and that wife could not have kids, the husband would be sorrowful with her. Notice that he is not sorrowful. Notice that he is at a celebration celebrating, and his wife is sad, and he has to try and cheer her up, and he's not sad with her. If they both were the only two in the marriage, and she couldn't have kids, that would mean technically he couldn't have kids.
What?
Well, he's not going to get pregnant.
I know that.
So my point is, if she's the only wife he's married to, that means he can't have kids either.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so he would be just as sorrowful. And then he would get to be mourning with her. He would get to be sad with her. When she goes to pray to the Lord and beg from the Lord a child, he would be doing the same. They'd be doing all this together. There'd be camaraderie. And then he wouldn't be trying to cheer her up. He'd be trying to lift up both their spirits. This is healthy. When someone is down, go down with them and come up with them. Don't just be up and say, yeah, you should get better. That doesn't work. That's not helpful.
Well, it's a appreciation. Like that's a sort of a help.
When you go to someone who's sad and say it's not that bad, that does not help them.
It's only making it story.
Now, if you go to a toddler who fell down and didn't really get hurt and you tell them it's not that bad, that's different because you know it's not that bad. But when someone's actually in a life situation that is bad, telling them it's not that bad does not help them. It doesn't fix things.
It always turns out great for me.
You're awesome.
The Bible actually says, let's put it this way, sorrow with those who sorrow, rejoice with those who rejoice. And the idea is that you don't just sympathize, you empathize. Does anyone know the difference between sympathize and empathize? Does anyone know the difference between sympathize and empathize?
I don't want to know.
Oh, wait, yeah.
You do?
I know what empathize means.
Okay, go for it.
Empathize means to feel how they're feeling.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. Sympathize and empathize are very close. They're not antonyms, they're not synonyms. They're just similar.
They're similar in
Yeah, they're related. So when I sympathize, okay, I say, oh, that's too bad, I'm sorry. Oh, wow, that's great. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I just tell you, that is nice, that is bad. When I empathize, I try to take your emotion and I do my best to feel it myself. I try and get inside your shoes, inside your head, see what you're going through, and I allow myself to cry if you're crying. I allow myself to celebrate if you're celebrating. I allow myself to try and go through what you're going through. And so there's a deeper level there, and that's what the Bible recommends. It says if you care about someone, if you love them, go with them. If they're going through a dark time, go there with them and bring them back. Don't just stand where you are and tell them, get out of your dark time. Come out of it. Don't just wave at them and say, that's nice, I'm glad you're celebrating, have a nice day.
Wait, but what if they totally hate you?
Well, that's a whole other scenario. I'm talking about a husband and wife.
Yeah, let's stay on.
I'm talking about a husband and wife. Try and be in that space, okay? Adding other hypotheticals can sometimes be helpful, but usually not too much.
No.
Postman and Wolf.
Now, the problem here is this man has kids. So when his wife, who doesn't have kids, is sad about not having kids, he has a really hard time empathizing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
She's sad she doesn't have kids. He's got kids.
What?
He has another wife.
Oh.
The other wife has kids. Those are his kids too. So yeah, he has a hard time empathizing. When she's sad, he's like, yeah, but like we've got each other. Isn't that good enough?
These kids.
Think about me. That's not really the right thing to be saying right then. The right thing is for him to be thinking about her. Yeah. Okay. Move past that. Go to verses 9 through 11. Here's what happens next. Once, after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle. Now this, keep in mind, is the high priest, the ultimate priest, the big the guy in charge. He is the priest over the entire country. Verse 10, Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow. O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon... Shh, guys are reading. Please read along. If you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer, and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. And other translations also add other things that are part of the Nazarite vow. The Nazarene vow, which is not the same as the Nazarite, actually. Another notable Nazarene was Samson. Does anyone remember Samson? Don't cut his hair, don't ever drink any alcohol, never touch a dead body, all those rules. So she's effectively promising my son will be a Nazarene. Verse 12, oh no wait, stop I guess at 11. Okay, so she makes this promise, and this is interesting. Hi again, Johnny. Don't make this mistake. You don't need to make a vow with God to get something from God. You don't need to. Hannah doesn't get this. She's pre-Jesus. She doesn't understand her relationship with God. So she just begs. She just pleads. She makes a deal. Now, God never has a verse that says, make me a deal. Make me an offer. I'll tell you what I think of it. God never has that verse, okay? So this is not something that God asks for. God doesn't say, make me a deal. That's weird. But Hannah goes ahead and does it. She's desperate. She's not looking for some Bible verse. Granted, she doesn't even have the whole Bible. At her point in history, there's only a very small number of the books of the Bible written. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, probably Judges, probably Ruth by this point have been written, okay? But that's it. Just those first few of the Bible, that's it. No more. Samuel is going to get written by her son. He's not born yet, so everything from Samuel on, not written, okay? Yeah.
Is the Bible finished, or is it possible for it to keep going?
Nowadays, right now, yeah, it's finished.
Oh.
It closes itself. You go through and read Revelation.
And it's the end of the world. You can't go past that.
Well, maybe God will write like the answer all your questions about heaven book. It would be like all the things we've ever wondered about heaven. I don't know.
There is actually a book like that.
Because God knows everything. He knows what we're wondering, and He knows what the future will hold.
like that.
So He could. He just chosen not to. He shows us some things about heaven, and not other things. Oh well.
That's the best.
All right. So, what's the point? The point is, as she's praying, she makes this deal, and people still do this. Still to this day, people still will pray to God and say, God, if you help me pay back my house loan, I'll quit smoking.
Wait, say that again?
If you help me pay back my house loan, I'll quit smoking.
Don't do that.
If you do this, I will do this. If you bring my child back to the Lord that's, walked away from God, I will tithe finally. Even though I've never done that before. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people make these deals with God. They say, if you do this miracle, God, if you change the world, if you fix my circumstances, if you make things the way I want, I will give you something.
But he doesn't stop.
See, this is a one-sided conversation. Negotiations don't work in a one-sided conversation.
Okay.
God wants to talk to us, but He talks usually through His Bible and occasionally directly. And when people make these deals, they don't wait for God to say, yes, I'll do it. They just throw the deal out into the wind, hoping that God will take the deal. Come on, God, bite. It's like they're fishing. Now, interestingly, she's not doing this to get gain. She's doing this because she doesn't see a way out of her circumstances. She doesn't see how she can be content, she can be happy in her life circumstances. The way she looks at her life right now, she thinks, I will be miserable for the rest of my life. That's the way she sees her life. Now, whether that is true or not, that's her perspective on it. Okay? She thinks my life is going to suck forever. That's basically it. Okay? I don't get to have kids. My husband will never value me like he values his wife who has kids. My sister wife will always mock me and make fun of me because I won't have kids. I will die childless and alone.
So
Sweet.
pretty much all of those
Always wanted to die like that.
It's a story that.
You will
Oh,
die.
never mind. That's somebody else. When later on she had the baby. Whoops. Wrong person in the Bible.
Alright, okay. Maybe you're thinking of like Abraham and Sarah?
Natural.
Yeah, they waited like decades to have kids.
Yeah.
Woof, that's a long time to wait.
Oh yeah.
Alright! Since we are living in the days since Jesus came to the earth and died for our sins, we can now be Christians. She didn't really have that chance back then, and so we get to see God the way He really wants to treat us. When we become Christians, He says that He becomes our adoptive Father. We are essentially His kids. And so this is kind of how it works. We don't obey Him as part of a deal. We don't do things nice for Him. We don't do what He wants because we're trying to get something from Him. We do what He wants because He's already loved us. He's already shown His love for us in infinitely unrepayable ways. And so we just obey Him out of gratitude, out of thankfulness, out of the fact that He loved us first. Then likewise, because He is like a father to us and He loves us unconditionally, He gives us gifts, blessings, rewards, just because He loves us.
Yeah.
It's not because we were obedient. It's not because we did well. It's not because we did what He said. It's because He loves us. This is cool because that means we don't do something out of repaying, out of a deal. And if we break the deal, oh my gosh, suddenly He takes away the reward. Likewise, we don't always have to be on our best behavior. We don't always have to be perfect in order for God to bless us. Because that's really good, because I'm never perfect. I always mess up.
Well,
And so her deal is a really strict deal. It's God, give me a kid, and then I'll give him back to you. Now, her hope might legitimately have been to then have more kids after that first kid. And this is actually not unfounded in these days, and still to this day. If a woman finds out she's barren, she can't have children, and suddenly one day that changes. She goes through, 10 years of trying to have kids, and all of a sudden she has a kid. It's not uncommon that whatever was broken in her body that became right stays right after kid 1, and she can go on and have kid 2, kid 3, kid 4, however many she would like. This is not uncommon. Whatever was broken once fixed usually stays mostly fixed. Not always the case, but often the case. So it might have been her hope, God, give me a kid, I'll give him back to you, and then hopefully I get to have more kids. I'm guessing she would like to keep one of her kids at some point and not just give them all away. That would make some sense. All right, next part of the story, verses 12 through 18. Shh, read along, please. Verse 12. As she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her. This is that high priest dude. Seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. Verse 14. Must you come here drunk? He demanded. Throw away your wine. Oh, no, sir, she replied. I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. In that case, Eli said, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed, and then went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. Interesting. She goes to pray. She's in great anguish. She is praying so vehemently, but silently, that an onlooker thinks she's drunk. You can kind of picture this. It wouldn't look normal to sit there with your eyes closed and be like silently yelling. That's a pretty weird thing to watch. Watch this, okay?
Yeah, I was drunk and
Are you drunk?
It's pretty weird. And so yeah, he's thinking she's just tripping out. Yep,
Eli's the priest.
he's the high priest.
Yeah, high priest.
Yep.
Not an onlooker.
Super high fees.
I meant any onlooker might think this. It's not just Eli who would have thought this. Anyone who saw that would have thought something was strange. And because all the feasting is going on and people do drink at the feast, his natural conclusion was not that she was on drugs, is that she got too drunk at the feast. That was the natural conclusion. Because, yeah, plenty of drunk people are probably around anyways. Alright, so, she goes her way. But this is what's so cool, guys. He says, go your way, may the Lord grant your request. and suddenly she's not sad anymore.
Oh wow.
What does that tell you? There's an inference there. It doesn't explicitly say it, but it's inferred that she is now.
It's happy because
not
she's saying that she cares what he thinks, that he cares about what she gets.
Yeah.
She cares that he cares.
Interesting. Yeah. She puts stock in Eli. She looks at Eli and she trusts his opinion. So when he says, "Go your way, may your request be granted," she thinks him saying that is like a vote in her direction with God. Because the high priest of the whole country, it's kind of like the Pope, just suddenly walking down the street and seeing you praying. Here's what you're praying, goes, "Yeah, I think God's going to do that." Some of us really put a lot of stock in the Pope, and so we'd be like, "Wow, the Pope said it'll happen. Dang, it's probably going to happen." I don't put a lot of stock in the Pope. He's a really nice guy. He's very smart and all. But he's just another person who loves God. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't rank him higher than any other human. He's just another human. But she obviously puts a lot of stock in Eli and ranks him very highly. So when he says that, she puts a lot of faith in it. And that's the key here. She's now trusting that God is going to grant her request and not just hoping that God is going to grant her request. You see the difference? It's not the please, 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 won't you. It's the wow, really, God is going to grant my request. Now she's trusting that he is. She doesn't know when, but she's trusting it's going to happen. Yeah.
So, like, if a girl was married to a guy and that guy was married to another girl, so that man has two wives, could one of those wives marry another guy?
No. No. Generally, in this crazy, ridiculous system, the women were always ranked lower than the men. That's, I mean, just this part of culture, this part of history. The women couldn't really have like a normal job like we think of it. So generally, you either, as a woman, you had everything your husband had. So you married your husband, so you had everything he had. Or you stayed with your parents, or you had nothing. These are like the three state of women. So with your parents, with your husband, or nothing. There wasn't really a very good chance for women to just like be on their own, have their own things.
So a woman couldn't have two husbands?
No. Because again, they were ranked lower. The husband was the one who was picking the wife, not the woman who was picking the man. So generally, like if you think of it that way, like a woman having more than one husband, it wouldn't be a man going out and saying, "I'd like a husband and a wife."
Oh, jeez.
Right? It'd normally be like a woman saying, "I want him as a husband, I want him as a husband, I want him as a husband." That whole situation of the woman picking the husband didn't really happen back then. So no, it wouldn't occur. It's since the husband was picking the wife, then he picks another wife. Then he picks another wife. Does that make sense? Again, not saying it's right, not saying it's a good idea. I'm not saying any of those things. I'm just saying that's how it was. Still a terrible idea. I don't think it's wise to undervalue women. I don't think it's wise to say they can't own things, they can't have jobs. I don't think any of that is good. I'm just saying that's how it was. It's the way that it was. Not a good idea, just the way that it was. Yeah.
So I've got two questions.
Go for it.
So if two different guys pick the same girl,
They fight over it. They wouldn't both get married to her. Yeah.
okay. And second question, did the girls ever have like a revolution of some sort?
There may have been small ones I don't know about, but the big one didn't happen until like recent history, not in Bible times. It was back in like 17, 18, and 1900s. There was various stages in which the women gained more and more rights. And now we've got to the point where we are now, where essentially if you find something that isn't equal between men and women, instantly people fight about it and get it fixed. And most things between men and women have been made equal by this point. So yeah, no, it's been all recent history, not ancient history. In ancient history, there really wasn't much uprising. As far as I know, and maybe there's instances I don't know about. There was instances, interestingly, not in this country that the Bible focuses on, not in Israel, but in other countries in the area where king and queen ruling the country, king dies, queen keeps the throne. Queen gets to be in charge of the whole country. It basically never happened that they're just like, yeah, we'll pick a woman, she'll be in charge. But it did happen more than once where the king would die and the queen would stay in charge. So there was instances where a woman was the very top official in a country, but oddly, she didn't change the laws to make women be equal. She didn't change the culture to make the women have equal say, equal position, equality in all things. She just got her power and she liked her power, and then eventually she would die. They'd put another king in place, and it'd go back to normal. So mostly in history, those are the only instances you find really of the women being at the top or at least equal, is when the queen suddenly stands up and is in charge. I know, weird, huh? Took a lot of years to get out from under that whole way of thinking. It wasn't just in Bible times, it wasn't just in Israel. It was all over the world for thousands of years. Women were always the lower class. It's pretty sad. Pretty sad. Christianity is one of the things that actually pushed forward the women and men are equal. You actually find in the New Testament several verses that talk about how it doesn't matter if you're a slave or a slave owner, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter if you're from this country or that country, God sees you all the same. You're all either his children or you're not in the family. Either you have God as your father or you don't. That's how God sees everyone. And so those were like the first seeds of thought to say that women and men were the same. They were equal. I shouldn't say the same because we're not the same. That is an arbitrary thought that isn't true, and people are pushing that nowadays. And it's just wrong. Men and women aren't the same. But we are meant to be equal. So, anyways, I digress. Okay. Verse 18, she went back, she was happy, and the reason she was happy was because she was trusting in God. Did she have a child yet? No. This is the cool thing, guys. Think about this. She's sad because she doesn't have a child, right? Right? Isn't that why she's sad?
Yep.
No, see, it's wrong.
No, it's not.
It's wrong. See, because if she was sad because she didn't have a child, then she wouldn't be happy again until she had a child. But that's not how it works. She was happy before she had a child. Interesting. That proves she wasn't sad because she didn't have a child. The reason she was sad was because she was not content. This is the case for every one of us all the time. When we are sad, it's because we are not content. This is always the case. When we get depressed, which is the stronger, longer lasting cousin of sadness, is because we are not content. Now, sometimes we blame our circumstances for us not being content. But interestingly, think about this. Hannah's circumstances have not changed. She went from not having a kid to not having a kid. But she went from sad to happy. Her circumstances remained. Likewise, she didn't hear a voice from God where God said, I will give you a son. That didn't happen.
Like he will use the
It didn't happen. What changed was she went from looking to her circumstances for her happiness to looking to God for her happiness. That's what changed. That's it. It's what she was counting on. She first was counting on her circumstances to make her happy. That didn't work because her circumstances sucked. She was in a 3-person marriage. Her sister wife was constantly mocking her. She couldn't have kids. Those are terrible circumstances. The reason she stopped being sad was because she stopped relying on her circumstances to make her happy and instead started relying on God to make her happy. Cool thing about relying on God is God never fails. God never fails. Circumstances always fail. Like 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, circumstances fail. Even when circumstances go mostly the way I thought they would, they never go completely the way I thought they would. I bought 4 lag bolts the other day to hang up these speakers on the wall so I could get rid of these tripods. And I was so pleased. This one went in smooth. Everything's nice. I got this gaffer tape on the wall so the paint will stay there even when we remove the speakers one day, because who knows, we'll probably change things again. It's awesome. And then I went to put in the other 2 lag bolts over here on this wall. The first one gave me trouble. It took me an hour to stick 1 lag bolt in there. And then the 4th one, I still don't have in properly after working on it for 3 days. I'm finally just going to have to cut it out of the wall. Like literally grind the head of the bolt off and pull out each piece of the mechanism piece by piece. So yeah,
What was the difference?
3 out of 4. I don't know. If I knew what the difference was, I'd go back in time and tell myself to do it differently. but I don't know. It's for the same lag bolt. It's probably just the drill bit was wearing down. I'll bet you. But my drill bit got a little bit smaller every time I drilled a hole. So by the fourth hole, my hole was smaller. Probably was what the problem is.
Well, you're
I
drilling
bet.
it.
But I don't know. I know. Get another drill bit, right? Thank you. Now you tell me.
Now
You gotta go back in time.
Oh, there we go. Let's go back in time.
But you were drilling it to some
But look at how clean that is. Eventually, I'll get the speaker cable. And it like does a straight up and down thing, goes up into the ceiling. Oh, it's so sweet. This looks so pretty. So out of the way, so tidy.
So you should take those out against the wall.
Because if I put them back, they drop dust on the floor. And I was doing it right before church on Wednesday, and I didn't want to have to vacuum again. We had just vacuumed, like twice. So if I put the ceiling tiles back, it drops all this gross stuff on the floor, and then I vacuum again.
And then gets
We'll
in your
put them back
eye.
eventually.
Like
Probably
that.
tomorrow. Yeah.
No.
That's from Andrew. He went back in the ceiling. Andrew, blame Andrew.
Oh, wait. Is he still? Oh, okay.
Alright, so things never go according to plan. They just don't. Don't rely on circumstances. Hannah starts relying on God, suddenly she's happy again. She knows God will come through for her. Check out the next verse. Verse 19. The entire family got up early the next morning. Remember, they're still in Shiloh at the tabernacle feasting place. The entire family got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. When Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. Samuel is not a Hebrew word, like a regular Hebrew word. She actually makes up the names. It's like a made-up word, but it rhymes with asked of the Lord or got from the Lord. It's like kind of the same word really in Hebrew. So like she rhymes it with that, and so she kind of invents the name Samuel. So first guy named Samuel here, and there's many Samuels after that are named after him. Yeah? Oh, you're Samuel. Yeah, there you go. So many Samuels. And so your name is meant to mean asked of the Lord or received from the Lord. You can translate it both ways. So kind of cool, right? All right, so she asked God for a son. She got a son. Yeah. Huh? In Hebrew. In Hebrew, the word Samuel isn't pronounced exactly Samuel. It sounds a bit like Samuel. And that word that sounds a bit like Samuel also rhymes with the Hebrew word for asked of the Lord. No, in English, Samuel doesn't rhyme with anything. Bamuel, Cramuel,
Samuel.
Samuel. Nothing.
Samuel.
Manuel! Ah! There we go. It's not true, but okay, we'll go with it.
Samuel.
Alright, so she gets a son. One thing I gotta draw your attention to, when it says the Lord remembered her plea, you'll see this phrase actually a lot in the Old Testament, the Lord remembering something. But this is the thing, guys. God doesn't forget stuff. He doesn't forget stuff. So when God remembers, it's not the act of, oh, I almost forgot. It's the act of, because you did this, because you said this, because this happened, now I will do this. He is suddenly acting on something that already occurred. He is recalling, he is failing to forget, if you will, what has already occurred in the past, and now he's going to do something in the present. God knows the future, God knows the past, God knows the present, and all of it perfectly. There's not a thing that goes on this planet he isn't aware of. Past, present, and future, he knows it all. So he is taking her faith that she put in him and then responding with giving her a child. It's not like, whoops, I almost didn't let her get pregnant. It's not like that. It's, I'm going to heal her body right now because of her faith. And then suddenly, whoop, she can. She can have a kid. It's fantastic. All right, so move on to the next set here, 21 through 23. The next year, Elkanah and his family went on their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and to keep his vow. We'll go back to that because that's odd. But Hannah did not go. She told her husband, wait until the boy is weaned. That means not drinking milk anymore, can eat solid foods. Then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently. One more verse. Whatever you think is best, Elkanah agreed. Stay here for now, and may the Lord help you keep your promise, because he knows that's going to be stupid hard, giving up a child. And so he kind of like offers up a little he offers up a tiny prayer. May the Lord help you keep your promise. So she stayed home and nursed the boy until he was weaned. Okay. So they go up like 3 times a year to Shiloh. This is mandatory for the guys I mentioned earlier. She optionally has always chosen to go. She likes going to see the tabernacle. She likes going to, worship the Lord there with everybody. She likes that. But she doesn't really think she can go to the tabernacle with Samuel and not leave him there. She promised she was going to leave him there at the tabernacle. So she wants to stay home until it's a good idea to leave him there. You go to the priests, hang out at a year-round tent in the middle of the desert, and you're like, here's a baby. He needs milk. That's not fair to all the dudes who work at the tent year-round in the desert. I mean, they don't make milk. That's not fair. So, she's going to wait until he can eat solid food, until he's actually of some use to them, until he's like a little boy who can help out around the tabernacle. 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, I don't really know. And then she's going to go leave him at the tabernacle with all the priests. That's still a huge thing for a mom. Letting go of one of her kids permanently. We'll find out later they do visit. Because, they go to the tabernacle every year, like 3 times a year. So they get to see him, But he stays. That's crazy. Alright, so she hasn't left him there yet. She's hanging on to him for a little bit longer. And it's interesting, too, that it said his vow. His vow. We didn't read about any vows coming from Elkanah, the husband. They didn't mention any. So we have to presume there's some vow they're not telling us about. Some vow that isn't in the story. Now, this book, remember, written by Samuel, who spent the most time with his mom, so he knows his mom's side of the story. So right here might be the first time that Hannah's finding out that her husband made a vow. And so maybe that's the only part she can really tell Samuel as she tells him the story of his life. She doesn't really know about her husband's vow. So we can guess, but we don't really know. My guess is, from the facts, the few that were given, is that while she was off praying to the Lord alone that one time, he saw her get up and leave the table crying. And so he made a prayer to the Lord. He made a deal with God. He told God, I'll bring you an extra sacrifice, or I'll do something next time I'm here at the tabernacle if you will give my wife Hannah a child. Because he says, I'm going to go back to the tabernacle to offer a normal sacrifice and to make good on my vow. So we know his vow has something to do with the tabernacle, but that's kind of all we know. So we're just guessing. We don't really know for sure, but we can guess. All right, so he goes off. She stays home. Check out verses 24 through 28. When the child was weaned, Hannah took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh. They brought along a 3-year-old bull for the sacrifice and a basket of flour and some wine. After sacrificing the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. Sir, do you remember me? Remember Eli's the high priest. Hannah asked him. I am the very woman who stood here several years ago praying to the Lord. I asked the Lord to give me this boy, and he has granted my request. Now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life. And they worship the Lord there. All right, so now we don't really see Eli's response. We're actually going to read part of the next chapter. Ha-ha! Oh, good job. We don't really see Eli's response, but we see Eli not saying no. And later in the book, we see Eli taking care of Samuel. So obviously he agrees to this little exchange where, he gets a free servant forever. Pretty cool, right? But he doesn't get it. Hannah doesn't get it. Samuel's too little. He doesn't get it. God is putting Samuel in a position that's going to set him up for the rest of his life. Samuel's job is going to become being a prophet. Prophets don't get paid well. They don't get paid anything. They get nothing. They only get what God provides for them, which is usually like just enough food to survive, and occasionally you get to sleep in someone else's house. That's usually it. Sometimes you get to build a house, yay, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just sleep under the stars for years at a time. It's a very humble job. And so God is preparing Samuel for this from a very young age, as young as could be managed. He's going to be a servant to a God-fearing, God-loving man. Now, Eli was not a perfect man. In fact, he was a pretty bad high priest. We find that out later in the book, too. But he did still do God's work, mostly. And so Samuel's going to be trained in how to do God's work. He's going to be trained in how to listen to God and talk to God. He's going to be trained in what God's laws are. And all the while, he's going to have the lowest position in the entire tabernacle. He's not a priest. He's a servant to a priest. So he's going to be trained in all these godly things, and he's going to be trained in how to be humble. So this is going to pay off later in his life, because he's going to be good at his job.
Okay.
He doesn't know it. Eli doesn't know it. Hannah doesn't know it. But God is setting this whole thing up. All right, now, as I mentioned chronological study of the Bible earlier, I mentioned that the Psalms are peppered through the whole Old Testament. The Psalms are written by different people in the Old Testament. Interestingly, there's actually a prayer here in this next section. It's very poetic, line by line. It's very Hebraic in its poetry. Hebrew poetry doesn't use rhyming structures. Hebrew poetry uses repeats, where you say the same thought 2 different ways, or 3 different ways, or 4 different ways. And so in this poem, it's 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and I think there's like a 3 tossed in there for good measure. And so what that does is, it says, here's how I think about this, here's how I think about this, and when you go into a triple instead of a double, that means I hold this to be more important. You're up-ranking something when you give it 3 lines instead of the patterned 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines. So when she does the 3 lines, take note, it's about God. And when it's 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, it's about circumstances in life. And so she's saying this poetic prayer about changes in life circumstances, but she's giving extra lines to God. And so she's ranking God higher than circumstances. That's the structure of the prayer. Check it out with me. Read chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Then Hannah prayed, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. Now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me." Do you guys see how there's pairs of lines? It's like a lefter line and then a slightly indented right line. These are the pairs. Notice there's a triple coming up here in verse 2. "No one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God." Back to the pairs. "Stop acting so proud and haughty. Don't speak with such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows what you have done. He will judge your actions." Now that's actually a double. I know it's a little hard to spot there. For the Lord is God who knows what you have done. That is 1 line. That's a double indent on that second part. Okay, keep reading. "He will judge your actions. The bow of the mighty is now broken, and those who stumble are now strong. Those who were well fed are now starving, and those who were starving are now full. The childless woman now has 7 children, and the woman with many children wastes away. The Lord gives both death and life. He brings some down to the grave, but raises others up. The Lord makes some poor and others rich. He brings some down and lifts others up. He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes, placing them in seats of honor. For all the earth is the Lord's, and he has set the world in order. He will protect his faithful ones, but the wicked will disappear in darkness. No one will succeed by strength alone. Those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. He thunders against them from heaven. The Lord judges throughout the earth. He gives power to his king. He increases the strength of his anointed one." Then Elkanah returned home to Ramah without Samuel, and the boy served the Lord by assisting Eli the priest. So that's where we're going to stop today.
Well, I want to read more.
But no,
We gotta read more.
That's fine. Open back up. Who wants to read more? I'm just kidding. So, what do we get from this little prayer?
I got it.
Her character has not changed. She is a bit dramatic. But her joy is alive. She has joy. She still has some thoughts about circumstances. Obviously, that's the bulk of the prayer. But what she's saying is interesting. She's saying God is in charge of circumstances and that nothing is permanent. Things always change. If you are down, wait on the Lord, and you will live to see up. You will live to see being brought up. If you are up and you're proud and you're haughty and you're just like, yeah, my life is awesome, I'm the best. Be careful. God might judge your pride. God might knock you down a few notches. So she is giving both a warning and an encouragement. If you're down, wait till life brings you back up. God has a plan. If you're up, be careful. Don't get proud, or God might knock you back down low. Interesting prayer. But she gives all power to God. She says God is in charge of all these things. Okay? Now, interestingly, God doesn't actually force bad situations on people. He'll punish people occasionally, but most of the time, life is just life. Evil people, random chance generate a lot of our bad situations. But what God does promise is very cool. God does not create all the bad situations in the world. In fact, he creates very, very few of them. Only occasionally does he test people. Only occasionally does he punish people. A lot of times, bad stuff is just bad stuff. But what he does promise is, no matter where the bad stuff came from, he can and will use it for good in the life of Christians. That is the interesting promise. That is the note that can provide joy even in the darkest situation. That God is willing to use any bad situation and use it for your good. That is a cool promise. And as we learn today, God keeps on 100% of his promises. 100% of the time. He is reliable. So my encouragement to you guys is to learn what Hannah learned. Circumstances should not be trusted. Good circumstances can turn into bad ones. Bad ones can turn into good ones. And if you rely on circumstances, your happiness will just go up and down. Sad, happy, happy, sad, all over the place. Instead, trust in God. He never fails. He never changes. Then you'll have joy in all situations. You'll have joy in all life circumstances, Johnny. How do you have joy in all circumstances? It's the only thing I wanted to teach you guys today. I've said it several times.
Not all.
How do you have joy in all circumstances? Because you can.
Be happy.
That's not an answer.
Have fun.
Nope.
Look on the bright side.
Yes.
Listen to God.
While we're in
Close.
Eat popcorn.
Trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
Trust in the Lord. Johnny, how do you have joy in all circumstances? Trust in the Lord. All right, let's pray. Lord, help us to trust in you. Help us to put aside circumstances, to know that you have a plan in every circumstance, no matter how bad it might look. Help us to put aside all that worldly stuff we get fixated on and to just look to you. And Lord, when we're running low, help us to go to you as Hannah did and just cry out. To pray to you, to talk to you, to have that conversation, and to not stay inside our heads. To not just focus on our circumstance and get worse and worse. Lord, help us to pick up our eyes and lift them up and gaze upon you in your majesty and your glory. To know that you have all power to change whatever needs to be changed. To know, Lord, that you have the wisdom to use every situation and to make it into something good for us. Help us, Lord, to wait on you too and be patient. Especially when sometimes your answer is yes, but wait a year. Or yes, but wait 10 years. Lord, give us patience to trust in you and to have joy in that meantime. In that time until the promise comes true. We ask all this in your name. Amen. Love you guys. Put your Bibles back on the Bible shelf. Try and stand them up so they actually fit. What's up? Yeah, you guys can all have another half donut.
Yes!
Donuts!
The winner. Big white cracked phone. Is it you? Hannah.
Sorry, I meant.
Michaela?
I need to try this.
What?
Your phone. It won. What's this?
Stress.
Oh, I won?
Is it good?
What? Was I like the only host?
It was 2. There's so much sugar in that. What is
It
it?
is all the leftover drinks in the cafe.
Yeah, it's way too much sugar for me.
It,
I don't mind a little sugar. That's a lot of
Or
sugar.
double stuffed mocha and a lot of rum.
Double stuffed mocha?
No, double stuffed, Oreo double stuffed.
Oh, nice.
It's pretty, it's a good thing if you like sugar. Just I'm gonna keep it in poison sour people.
Love you guys. Have a great Sunday. Someone didn't put their Bible back. Cade, was that you? Where'd Cade go?
Daniel.
Oh, he's gone. I thought you were Cade. Who called my name?
Him. Do you want something from the since you want?
Of course she does. What would you like?